It was a super calm evening in my little neighborhood called Sunny Hills. The sun had just gone down, slipping behind the big, green trees. The sky turned all orange and pink, like a giant painting. Me, Jake was outside in my front yard, doing something fun. I was putting up fairy lights. You know those tiny, sparkly lights that twinkle like stars? I had a big string of them, and I was hanging them up around my porch. They were soft and pretty, glowing all white and happy. When I turned them on, my house looked like a cozy little dream. I smiled and thought, wow, this is so cool. Who could hate this? Oh boy, was I wrong about that? See, I'm pretty new to Sunny Hills. I moved here just a few months ago because I wanted a nice, quiet place to live. My house is small but cute, with a little yard and a big tree out front. I've got a fluffy dog named Max who likes to run around and bark at squirrels. Everything was going great until that night with the fairy lights. That's when I met trouble. Big trouble. And her name was Karen. Now, Karen wasn't just any neighbor. Oh no. She was the HOA Karen. What's HOA, you ask? It stands for Homeowners Association. It's like a group of people who make rules for the neighborhood, like what color your house can be or how tall your grass can grow. Sounds boring, right? Well, Karen didn't think so. She loved the rules. She loved them so much, she carried the HOA rulebook around like it was her favorite toy. She'd flip through it, point at stuff, and tell everyone what they were doing wrong. She was like a teacher who never stops giving homework except way Bozier. Karen lived right across the street from me. Her house was super neat. The grass was always perfect, like she cut it with scissors. Her mailbox was shiny and bright red, and she'd yell at anyone who even leaned on it. She was always watching us. Always. If my dog Max barked just one little bark, she'd pop out her door and glare at him like he'd robbed a bank. If my grass got a tiny bit too long, like half an inch, she'd march over with a ruler, measure it, and shake her head. Jake, she'd say, this is unacceptable. I'd just nod and say, okay, Karen, because I didn't want a fight. But deep down, I thought, man, this lady needs to chill. So, back to that night. There I was, standing on my ladder, hanging up my fairy lights. I had them looped around the porch railing, and they sparkled so nice. I was humming a little song, feeling proud. Max was sitting on the grass, wagging his tail, watching me work. The air smelled like flowers, and a cool breeze was blowing. It was perfect. I stepped back to look at my lights and smiled big. This is awesome, I thought. Everyone's gonna love this. But then, I heard it, a loud, mad voice cutting through the quiet. Hey, you, it shouted. I turned around, and there she was, Karen. She was stomping across the street, her flip-flops slapping the pavement. Her face was all scrunched up, like she'd just bitten a lemon. She had her phone in one hand, already pressing buttons, and her rulebook in the other, waving it like a flag. Her eyes were locked on my fairy lights, and she looked at them like they were the worst thing she'd ever seen. Like they were a giant pile of stinky garbage or something. I froze, still holding my ladder. Hi, Karen, I said, trying to sound nice. But she didn't even say hi back. She just pointed at my lights and yelled, those lights are against the rules. They're not allowed. I'm calling 911 right now. I blinked. 911? The number you call for emergencies? Like if your house is on fire or a robber's breaking in. I looked at my little twinkly lights, then back at her. Karen, I said, they're just lights. They're not hurting anybody. But she didn't care. She put the phone to her ear and started talking fast. Yes, hello, police. There's a criminal here putting up illegal lights. You need to come quick. I stood there, my mouth hanging open. 911? For fairy lights? Lady, are you serious? I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Because Karen looked dead serious. Her face was turning red, and she kept pointing at me like I was some big bad guy. I scratched my head, wondering how this was even happening. Max tilted his head too, like he was just as confused. Neighbors started peeking out their windows, probably thinking, what's going on now? I could have yelled back at her. I could have said, Karen, you're nuts. But I didn't. I just stood there, waiting. Why? Because I had a feeling something big was coming. Something Karen didn't see yet. Here's the crazy part: she thought she was in charge. She thought she could boss me around with her rules and her phone call. But what she didn't know was that her whole world was about to flip upside down. Something wild was brewing, and it was gonna hit her like a surprise party she never wanted. I didn't know all the details yet, but I'd heard little whispers around the neighborhood. Whispers about Karen. Whispers that made me think, maybe she's not as perfect as she acts. And that night, those whispers were about to turn into a big, loud shout. So, what do you think, friends? Have you ever had someone flip out over something tiny, like Karen did with my lights? Maybe a teacher got mad because your pencil was too loud, or a friend freaked out over a silly game. Tell me in the comments, I wanna know. And stick around, because this story's about to get wild. Karen thought she was winning, but oh boy, she had no idea what was coming next. My fairy lights? They were just the start. The real fun was about to begin. Karen wasn't new at this game. Nope, not at all. She'd been bossing everyone in Sunny Hills around for years and years. She was like the queen of the neighborhood, or at least, she thought she was. If your mailbox was painted the wrong color, like a tiny bit too light blue or maybe a funky yellow, bam, she'd grab her little notebook and write you up. She'd scribble your name down and stick a nasty note on your door that said, "Fix this now." If your kids were outside playing and laughed too loud, yep, she'd come stomping over. She'd bang on your door, cross her arms, and say, "Keep it down. This is a quiet street." Everyone knew her. Everyone was a little scared of her. And me? Well, I was the new kid on the block, just trying to make my house feel nice and cozy. But to Karen, I wasn't just new, I was a big troublemaker. So there she was, standing in my yard that night. The fairy lights were twinkling behind me, all soft and pretty, but Karen didn't care about that. She was too busy yelling into her phone. She'd already dialed 911, like my lights were some huge emergency. "Yes, officer," she shouted, her voice loud and sharp. "There's a criminal here. He's putting up illegal lights in his yard. You need to hurry." I stood there, holding my ladder, trying not to laugh. A criminal? Me? Because of some sparkly lights? I couldn't believe it. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "Karen," I said, nice and slow, "they're just lights. They're not hurting anyone. They're not even loud or bright or anything." "But Karen?" Oh, she didn't like that one bit. She spun around so fast, her flip-flops almost flew off her feet. Her face was redder than a big, ripe tomato. Her eyes got all narrow, like she was trying to shoot lasers at me. "You don't get to talk back to me, Jake," she snapped. "I run this neighborhood. I make the rules around here, and you better listen." She waved her phone in the air like it was a magic wand, and then she pointed at my lights again. "Those things are against the rules, and I'm gonna make sure you take them down tonight." I looked at her, then at my lights, then back at her. I could have argued. I could have said, "Hey, Karen, chill out. These lights are fine." I could have told her she was being silly, calling the police over something so small. I mean, who does that? Who calls 911 because of fairy lights? But I didn't say any of that. Nope. I just stood there, quiet as a mouse, holding my ladder. Why? Because I didn't want to make her even madder, not yet. See, I'd heard some things about Karen. Little whispers from other neighbors. Tiny hints that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as perfect as she pretended to be. And I had a funny feeling that something big was about to happen. Something that would surprise her and me too. Karen kept pacing back and forth in my yard, her flip-flops smacking the ground. She was talking to herself now, muttering stuff like, "This is ridiculous. New people think they can do whatever they want. Not on my watch." She glared at me every few seconds, like I was the worst person she'd ever met. My dog Max was sitting on the grass nearby, watching her with his head tilted. Even he looked confused, like, what's her problem? I wanted to pet him and say, "Don't worry, buddy, she's just loud," but I stayed still. I didn't want to give Karen any more reasons to yell. The thing is, Karen had been picking on me ever since I moved in. Like, the very first day I got here, She came over to my house. I was unloading boxes from my truck, and she marched up with her rule book. "Jake," she said, "your truck's too loud. And those boxes better not sit there too long." I just nodded and said, "Sure, Karen," because I didn't want trouble. Then, a week later, she complained that Max barked at a bird. "A bird?" she said, "Dogs need to be quiet here." I thought, lady, he's a dog. Dogs bark sometimes. But I didn't say that. I just smiled and kept going. Now, with the fairy lights, it was the same old story. She saw me doing anything and decided it was wrong. She didn't even ask me about it first. She didn't say, "Hey, Jake, are those lights okay with the rules?" Nope. She went straight to yelling and calling the cops. That's how Karen worked. She loved being in charge. She loved telling people what to do. And if you didn't listen? Oh boy, she'd make a big fuss until you gave in. But here's the thing, I wasn't scared of her. Not really. Sure, she was loud and mean, but I'd dealt with bossy people before. Back where I used to live, there was this guy who'd yell if you parked your bike too close to his house. I learned to just ignore him, and he'd go away eventually. Karen was like that, I figured. All bark, no bite. Or so I thought. Standing there, watching her rant about my lights, I started to wonder. Those whispers I'd heard, stuff like, "Karen's not so great," or "she's hiding something," kept popping into my head. What if they were true? What if Karen wasn't the perfect rule keeper she acted like? She was still on the phone, talking to the 911 person. Yes, he's breaking the rules right now. "I need someone here fast," she said. I leaned against my ladder, crossing my arms. The fairy lights twinkled behind me, looking all innocent and pretty. I almost wanted to laugh again, but I held it in. Karen hung up the phone and smirked at me. "You're in big trouble now, Jake," she said. "The police are coming, and they'll make you take those down. Maybe even fine you." She looked so proud, like she'd just won a prize. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. My heart was beating a little faster, not because I was worried about the cops, but because I had this weird feeling. Something was off. Something big was about to happen, and Karen had no clue. Her big moment, the one where she thought she'd win, was about to flop. Hard. I didn't know how or why yet, but I could feel it. The air felt buzzy, like before a storm. And Karen? She was too busy yelling to notice. The minutes kept going, tick-tock, tick-tock, and Karen didn't stop moving. She walked back and forth in my yard like a guard dog protecting a big bone. Her flip-flops went slap 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 on the grass, and she wouldn't quit talking. She kept saying stuff under her breath, like rules are rules, and this neighborhood has standards. She'd point at my fairy lights every few seconds, like they jumped up and said something mean to her. Those little twinkly lights just hung there, all pretty and quiet, but Karen acted like they were her worst enemy. I didn't get it. They were just lights. I leaned against my ladder, my arms crossed, just waiting. I wasn't mad or scared, I was curious. See, I'd done my homework before all this started. When I moved to Sunny Hills, I got a copy of the HOA rules, that big book Karen loved so much. I sat down one night with a snack and read it from the first page to the last. Guess what? Those fairy lights? They were totally okay. The rules said you could put up small lights as long as they weren't super bright or blinking like crazy. Mine were soft and steady, so I knew I wasn't breaking any rules. But I didn't tell Karen that. Nope, not yet. I wanted to see what she'd do. It was like a game. Karen thought she was winning, but I had a secret up my sleeve. She kept pacing and muttering, her face still red as a big cherry. "You can't just do whatever you want, Jake," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "I've been here longer. I know what's allowed." I didn't say anything back. I just watched her, my ladder cool against my back. My dog Max was sitting nearby, his fluffy tail wagging a little. He looked at Karen, then at me, like he was saying, "What's her deal?" I shrugged at him with my eyes. I didn't know either, but I had a feeling something funny was about to happen. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something weird. A police car rolled up the street. It was super quiet, no loud sirens, no flashing lights, just a slow, Sneaky roll. It stopped right in front of Karen's house, not mine. Two officers climbed out. They had on dark uniforms and serious faces, but they didn't even look at me. Nope. They walked straight toward Karen's house, their boots tapping the sidewalk. I squinted, trying to figure it out. Wait a minute, I thought. She called the cops on me, right? So why are they over there? Karen didn't notice them at first. She was too busy yelling at me. She waved her phone around like it was a sword and shouted, "You'll be sorry when the cops haul you away, Jake. They're coming for you." Her voice was sharp, like a teacher scolding a kid who forgot their homework. She looked so sure of herself, like she'd already won. I tilted my head and scratched my chin. Something wasn't adding up. If the cops were here for me, why were they at her door? I decided to give her a little hint. Karen," I said, keeping my voice nice and calm. "You might want to look behind you." She stopped pacing, her flip-flops freezing in place. She turned her head real slow, like she didn't believe me. Then she saw them, the two officers standing right at her front door. They were knocking, tap tap tap, waiting for someone to answer. Karen's jaw dropped. Her mouth hung open so wide, I could have tossed a ball in there. Her eyes got big, and she blinked fast, like she couldn't figure out what was happening. "What's going on?" she barked, her voice all shaky now. She stomped toward the cops, her flip-flops slapping louder than ever. "Hey. You're supposed to be here for him." She pointed at me with her phone, like I was a bad guy in a movie. The officers turned and looked at her. One of them was tall with a mustache, and the other was shorter with glasses. They didn't smile. They didn't laugh. They just stared at her, real serious. The tall one spoke first. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and steady, "we need to talk to you. Now." Karen blinked again. "Me," she squeaked. "What? No, no, no. You've got it all wrong. I called you about him." She jabbed her finger at me again, her face getting redder by the second. "He's the one with the illegal lights. Arrest him." The cops didn't move. They just stood there, looking at her like she was a puzzle they needed to solve. The short one with glasses glanced at me, then back at Karen. He didn't say anything, but I could tell something big was up. I stayed quiet, leaning on my ladder. My fairy lights twinkled behind me, all soft and happy, like they didn't care about the drama. Max wagged his tail a little harder, like he was excited too. I started to smile, just a tiny bit. See, I'd heard those whispers about Karen before, little bits and pieces from neighbors. One guy said, "She's not as nice as she acts." Another lady told me, "Karen's got secrets, you watch." I didn't know what they meant back then, but now it was starting to make sense. The cops weren't here for me. They were here for her. And Karen had no idea. She kept arguing with the officers, her voice getting louder and squeakier. "This is a mistake," she said. "I'm the one who keeps this place perfect. He's the troublemaker." She pointed at me so many times, I almost waved just to mess with her. But I didn't. I just watched. The tall cop pulled out a little notebook and flipped it open. He looked at it, then at Karen. "Are you Karen Thompson?" he asked. She nodded, still mad. "Yes, that's me. Now go get him." But the cop shook his head. "We're not here for him," he said. "We're here for you." Karen's face changed. It went from red to white, like all the color ran away. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I couldn't hear what the cops said next, they were too far away, but I saw Karen's hands start to shake. Something was wrong. Something big. And I was about to find out what. Oh, you're gonna love this next part, friends, stay with me. It's getting wild. Karen wasn't happy, not one bit. She marched over to the police officers standing by her house, her arms waving like crazy. Her flip-flop slapped the ground hard, and her face was all scrunched up. "No, no, no," she yelled, pointing back at me. "You're here for him. He's the one breaking the rules. Not me." She was so loud, I bet the whole street could hear her. She kept jabbing her finger my way, like I was some bad guy she wanted to get rid of. My fairy lights twinkled behind me, all soft and pretty, but Karen didn't care about that. She was sure the cops were here to grab me and take me away. But the officers? They didn't move. They didn't even look at me much. They just stood there, calm as could be, watching Karen freak out. The tall one with the mustache reached into his pocket and pulled out a little notepad. He flipped it open and looked at it, then at her. "Karen Thompson," he said, his voice deep and steady. Karen stopped waving her arms for a second and nodded fast. "Yes, that's me," she said. "Now go arrest him. He's the problem." But the cop didn't smile or nod back. He just kept his serious face and said, "We've got a warrant. You're under investigation for fraud." Fraud. Fraud. My eyes got big, real big, like saucers. I couldn't believe what I just heard. Fraud means stealing money or lying to trick people out of their cash. Was he saying Karen was a thief? I looked at her, and her face changed fast. It went from red and mad to white as a ghost. She looked like she'd seen something scary in a movie. "What are you talking about?" she squeaked, her voice all high and shaky. She didn't sound so tough anymore. She sounded scared. The officer with the notepad didn't yell or get mad. He just kept talking, nice and calm. "We've been watching you for months," he said. "Turns out, you've been pocketing HOA fees, thousands of dollars. Neighbors reported it, and we've got proof." Karen blinked fast, like she didn't understand. Pocketing HOA fees. I thought. That's when it hit me. HOA fees are the money everyone in the neighborhood pays to keep things nice, like fixing the playground or mowing the big grass patches. We all gave Karen our money every month because she was in charge of the HOA. She was supposed to use it for stuff like that. But now the cop was saying she kept it? Like, put it in her own pocket instead? I couldn't believe it. My mouth dropped open, and I stared at her. Karen, the lady who yelled about rules all the time, was a crook. She'd been taking our money, my money, the neighbor's money, and keeping it for herself. All while she pointed fingers at us for little things like fairy lights or loud kids. I looked around, and I saw curtains moving in windows up and down the street. Neighbors were peeking out, their faces pressed to the glass. They were whispering to each other, their eyes big too. They couldn't believe it either. Karen shook her head fast. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice wobbly. "I'd never do that. I'm the one who keeps this place perfect." She waved her arms again, like she could make the cops go away. But the tall officer didn't buy it. He held up his hand to stop her. "Tell it to the judge, ma'am," he said, real firm. That shut her up quick. Her mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gulping air. She didn't know what to say. For the first time ever, Karen didn't have a comeback. I stood there, still leaning on my ladder, trying to wrap my head around it. My dog Max wagged his tail beside me, like he was happy something exciting was happening. The fairy lights glowed behind us, all peaceful and quiet, while Karen's world fell apart right in front of me. I started to smile a little, not a mean smile, just a wow, this is wild smile. All this time, Karen had been bossing us around, acting like she was better than everyone. She'd bang on doors, write nasty notes, and tell us we were wrong. But now it was clear she was the one doing something bad. Really bad. And then came the best part, the part that made me almost laugh out loud. See, Karen had called 911 herself. She'd dialed those numbers, yelling about my lights, thinking the cops would come running to help her. "Get here quick," she'd said. "He's a criminal." But instead of getting me in trouble, her call just made everything happen faster. The police were already on their way to her house because of the fraud stuff. Her 911 call? It was like pressing a big speed up button. She thought she was so smart, but she'd messed up big time. Talk about a backfire. The short cop with glasses pulled something out of his pocket, a pair of shiny handcuffs. Karen's eyes got even wider, like they might pop out of her head. Wait, wait, she said, stepping back. "You can't do this." "I didn't do anything." But the tall cop shook his head. "We've got papers, ma'am. Proof from the bank. Checks you cashed. People saw you." Karen's hands started to shake, and she looked around, like maybe she could run. But where was she gonna go? The whole street was watching now, kids, grown ups, even old Mr. Jenkins with his cane, all peeking out their doors. I remembered those whispers I'd heard about Karen. Little things neighbors said, like she's sneaky or something's not right with her. I didn't pay much attention back then. I thought they were just annoyed with her bossy ways. But now it all made sense. She wasn't just mean. She was hiding something huge. Thousands of dollars. That's a lot of money, like, enough to buy a car or a million candy bars. And she'd been taking it from us, bit by bit, while she yelled about mailboxes and grass. Karen's shoulders slumped. She didn't look like the queen of Sunny Hills anymore. She looked small and scared. The tall cop nodded to the short one, and they stepped closer to her. "Let's go, ma'am," the short one said, holding up the handcuffs. Karen's voice got quiet. "This isn't fair," she mumbled. But nobody felt sorry for her, not after what the cops said. She'd been caught, and there was no way out. I couldn't stop staring. My heart was beating fast, not because I was scared, but because it was so crazy. Karen, the rule lady, was a thief. And her big plan to get me in trouble? It blew up right in her face. The cops weren't here for my lights. They were here for her. And oh boy, it felt like justice was coming fast. The police officers didn't waste any time. They grabbed Karen by the arms and started walking her to their patrol car. Her hands were stuck behind her back, locked up tight with shiny silver handcuffs. She didn't look happy, not one bit. As they passed me, she turned her head and glared right at me. Her eyes were all narrow and mean, like she wanted to yell some more. "This isn't over, Jake," she hissed, her voice low and mad. I just shrugged my shoulders, nice and calm. "Enjoy your new lights in jail," I said with a little grin. She didn't like that, but the cops kept moving her along, so she couldn't say anything back. When they got to the car, the short cop with glasses opened the door, and the tall one helped Karen slide inside. She wasn't stomping or yelling anymore. She just sat there, looking out the window with a grumpy face. The door shut with a loud click, and that was it. Karen was done. The neighbors started coming out of their houses, one by one. First it was just a few, but then more and more showed up. They stood on their porches and lawns, clapping their hands and cheering loud. "Woohoo," someone shouted. "Good riddance," said another. Turns out, Karen had been mean to everyone for years, bossing them around, making silly rules, and yelling all the time. They were sick of it, and now they were free. With Karen gone, Sunny Hills felt different, like a big weight was lifted off us. The air seemed lighter, and everyone smiled more. It was like we could finally breathe easy again. That night, I went back to my yard and finished hanging up my fairy lights. I climbed my ladder, looped them around the porch, and plugged them in. They twinkled brighter than ever, all soft and sparkly against the dark sky. My dog Max sat on the grass, wagging his tail, like he was proud of me. I looked at the lights and thought, wow, these are awesome. No more complaints, no more HOA tyrant running around with her rule book. Just peace, sweet, quiet peace. The next day, the neighbors started talking, and we found out the whole story. Karen had stolen a ton of money, over $10,000. That's so much cash, you could buy a big bike or a giant pile of toys with it. She'd been taking our HOA fees, money we all paid to fix stuff in the neighborhood, and keeping it for herself. The police had papers and pictures proving it, so she was in big trouble. Everyone said she was toast, like, totally done. She'd have to go to jail and pay it all back, and nobody felt bad for her. Not after how she'd treated us. And me? I turned into kind of a hero by accident. People started calling me the guy who took down the neighborhood villain, all because of my fairy lights. How cool is that? I didn't even mean to do it, I just wanted a pretty house. But when Karen called the cops on me, she messed up her own plan. Now the street was happier, and my lights stayed up, twinkling every night. Pretty awesome, right? Okay, friends, let's talk about what happened. Here's the big thing I learned: sometimes the loudest people, the ones who act like they're the boss of everything, are hiding the biggest secrets. Think about Karen. She was always yelling, pointing fingers, and telling everyone what to do. She walked around Sunny Hills like she owned it, waving her rulebook and making us feel small. She thought she could boss me around just because I put up some fairy lights. She acted so big and tough, like nothing could stop her. But guess what? In the end, she tripped right over her own sneaky game. All that shouting and bossing didn't save her, it just made her fall harder. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Karen was so busy trying to get me in trouble that she didn't see what was coming. She thought she was smart, calling the cops on my twinkly lights. But those lights? They didn't do anything wrong. They just sat there, shining pretty, while Karen's secrets came out. She was the real troublemaker, not me. It just goes to show you can't always trust what you see on the outside. Like a book with a fancy cover, it might look nice, but the story inside could be a big mess. Karen's cover was all about rules and being perfect, but inside, she was sneaking money and being mean. And here's another cool thing: don't mess with a guy who's got fairy lights and a little patience. I didn't yell back at Karen. I didn't fight or get mad. I just waited, watched, and let things happen. My light stayed up, twinkling away, and Karen ended up in handcuffs. Patience can be super strong, you know? It's like when you're playing a game and you don't rush, you wait for the right moment, and then you win big. That's what happened to me. I didn't even try to be a hero, it just worked out that way. So, what do you think, friends? I want to hear from you. Drop a comment down below and tell me, would you have fought back sooner if Karen was yelling at you? Like, would you have argued with her right away and said, "Hey, these lights are fine"? Or would you have waited like me, staying quiet until the truth came out? There's no right or wrong answer, I'm just curious. And if this story made you smile or laugh, give it a big thumbs up. It was a wild ride, right? From fairy lights to cops to Karen getting caught, it's a tale I won't forget. Life's funny sometimes. The people who act the biggest can fall the hardest. And the quiet ones like me with my lights might surprise you. So next time someone's being loud and bossy, just smile and wait. You never know what secrets they're hiding. Thanks for sticking with me, friends. See you next time for more crazy tales, ones that'll make you laugh, cheer, and maybe even put up some twinkly lights of your own.